Adrian Sterling had sent the invitation at 2 in the morning, half convinced he was only being polite. And by the time Naomi Calder walked through the doors of the Sterling family's lake house on Rosso, with 3 small children trailing behind her, he understood that some part of him had been waiting 5 years for exactly this moment to go wrong. He hadn't expected the children. He certainly hadn't expected all 3 of them to have his eyes. That particular grey-green that his mother called sterling frost when she wanted to sound fond of it, and impossible to photograph when she didn't. The party had been arranged with the kind of precision Adrian applied to everything. String lights threaded through the cedars along the shoreline, a dock lined with lanterns, a jazz trio angled so the sound would carry, but not shout. Muskoka in July smelled like wood smoke and cut grass, and the particular cleanliness of a lake that cost several $1 million to have a view of. His fiancée, Bianca Colton, moved through the crowd in pale green silk, laughing at something a city councillor had said, her engagement ring catching the string lights every time she gestured. She was the kind of woman his mother had been angling him toward since he was 26. The good family, good posture, a Rosedale childhood and a McGill degree, and an instinct for saying the correct thing to donors without ever seeming to try. Adrian had proposed to her on the terrace of his condo on Bay Street 3 months earlier, the CN Tower lit behind them like something staged. It had all been very tasteful. It had all felt, if he was honest with himself, like closing a deal. Then the caterer's assistant said something to the valet, and the valet said something to the man at the gate, and a woman in a simple navy dress came up the flagstone path with 3 children clustered around her. And everyone at the party who happened to be facing the water turned to look. The little girl on the left had her hand fisted in the woman's skirt. The boy in the middle was studying the lanterns like they were a puzzle he intended to solve. And the second girl, the bold one, was already 3 steps ahead of the group, marching toward the dock as though she owned it. "Isla, wait for your brother," the woman said, and something in Adrian's chest folded in on itself, because he knew that voice. He had known that voice in a rented apartment above a bookstore on Queen Street West, 6 years and 1 lifetime ago. Naomi Calder had not changed the way money changes people because there had never been money involved. She had simply become steadier. Her dark hair was pulled back loosely. Her dress had clearly been chosen for the fact that it wouldn't wrinkle in a car seat, not for how it would look under lantern light, and it looked lovely anyway. She stopped just past the gate, and 100 guests turned to look at her, and she did not flinch. "Is this a castle?" the bold girl asked, tipping her head back to take in the house. "It's a big cottage, sweetheart," Naomi said. "Use your inside voice, even outside." Isla considered this instruction with visible skepticism and let it go. Adrian's glass of champagne had stopped somewhere between the table and his mouth. The boy, solemn, dark-haired, maybe 4, was looking up at the string lights with an expression of pure architectural interest. The shy girl, the one gripping Naomi's skirt, was watching the water with the particular suspicion of someone deciding whether a lake could be trusted. Triplets. The word arrived in Adrian's mind slowly, less like a thought and more like a weight settling behind his ribs. Across the lawn, Bianca's laugh rang out again, bright and easy, and then faltered. She followed his gaze. Her smile held for exactly 1 second before it thinned into something more careful. "Adrian," she said low. "Who is that?" He didn't answer. He was watching the boy reach into the pocket of his little navy blazer. Someone had dressed all 3 of them with care, he registered dimly. Someone who did not have much money but had spent what she had, and produce a folded square of paper. Not a photograph, a drawing. Crayon done with the particular seriousness of a 4-year-old, a tall man in dark clothes, a woman in blue, 3 small figures under a lopsided sun. Underneath, in blocky, uneven letters, someone had written, "Maybe, Dad." "Cooper," Naomi said quietly. "Not now. I just wanted to check," the boy said, not moving. He was looking at Adrian with an expression far too grave for his age. "Are you the man from the drawing?" The lake seemed to go very quiet, though of course it hadn't. The jazz trio was still playing, and somewhere behind him Adrian's mother, Diane Sterling, had gone very still in her seat at the head table, one hand pressed flat against the white cloth, as though bracing herself. "How old are they?" Adrian asked. His voice didn't sound entirely like his own. 4, Naomi said. "They turn 5 at Thanksgiving, he repeated, and the word landed strangely, because he had celebrated 4 Thanksgivings since the last time he'd seen her, and apparently every one of them had happened around the edges of 3 lives he hadn't known existed. "Their names?" he managed. Naomi's mouth trembled once before she steadied it, and Adrian understood distantly that this had cost her something to arrange, to stand here in front of everyone who mattered to him and say this out loud. "Isla, Cooper, and Nora." The shy one peeked out from behind Naomi's skirt at the sound of her own name. "I'm Nora," she offered, as if this needed clarifying. Adrian crouched before he'd decided to move, and the glittering ring of guests blurred somewhere above him, and the children were suddenly at eye level, and that was easier somehow. Isla had a barrette shaped like a maple leaf and a very direct stare. Cooper was still holding the drawing like it was evidence in a trial. Nora was examining his cufflinks with deep suspicion. "Hello, Nora," he said carefully. "I'm Adrian. That's a fancy name. It's a fancy party. Do you have Timbits?" A laugh cracked out of someone in the crowd and was quickly smothered. For the first time since Naomi had come through the gate, Adrian felt himself breathe. "I believe," he said, "this party has an unreasonable number of tiny sandwiches, and I am prepared to trade several for one box of Timbits, if such a thing exists." Isla weighed this. "Deal." Before Naomi could answer, Bianca arrived, her hand landing on Adrian's sleeve with a gesture that was elegant and unmistakably proprietary. "Of course she can speak with you," Bianca said, smiling at Naomi in a way that made the smile function like a blade, without ever once looking like one. "Old friends deserve a moment, perhaps after the toast." Naomi looked at her, then at the ring on her hand. "Congratulations," she said, and it was gracious, and that was somehow worse than if it hadn't been. Adrian's mother reached and presumed he could say anything further. Diane Sterling wore steel grey, and the family's sapphire earrings, her silver hair cut into the kind of bob that suggested she had never once, in 61 years, allowed the wind to have an opinion about it. "Adrian, do not make a scene." "Did you know?" he asked. Something moved behind her eyes, just barely, and disappeared. "This is not the time." That answer told him more than a confession would have. "Did you know?" he asked again. "People are watching," Bianca said quietly. "Let them." He set his glass down on a passing tray and walked toward Naomi and the children, and the party quieted in ripples as he crossed the lawn, the trio's music losing its confidence measure by measure. The Sterling Lake House had a sunroom that faced the water, all pale pine and linen cushions that were far too nice for children, which was precisely why Isla climbed onto one of them with both sandals still on until Naomi gave her a look that made her slide down again. Cooper sat at the low table, carefully unfolding his drawing and smoothing it flat with both hands. Nora chose the corner nearest the reading lamp and had a quiet conversation with the lampshade, as though it might also be nervous. Adrian stood by the door, feeling too formal, too tall, too much like a stranger inside his own family's house. "You can sit," Naomi said. He sat. No boardroom in 15 years had made him this aware of his own hands. For a few minutes, there was only the sound of small things. Juice being poured, a plate set down, Isla asking whether grown-ups at parties always talked this much, Cooper counting the buttons on Adrian's jacket. Naomi moved between the three of them without any visible effort, tucking a napkin here, moving a cup out of elbow's reach there, and Adrian watched her and felt something crack open quietly in his chest. This was not new gentleness. This was the choreography of someone who had done this alone every single day for 4 years. "I wrote to you," she said finally, not looking up from Nora's plate, 3 times. Once when I found out, once after the ultrasound when they told me it was 3, once after they were born. "I never got any letters. I believe you now," Naomi said. "Your mother told me as much before you crossed the lawn. What did she say?" "That there was a trust available for the children if I signed something acknowledging it privately and left before anyone with a camera noticed I'd come." Something in Adrian's chest went very cold. Across the low table, Cooper looked up. "Did Grandma say something not nice?" "Grown-up talk, sweetheart," Naomi said, touching his hand. "Mom says grown-up talk is boring because people use too many words," Isla offered. "Your mom is right," Adrian said, and his voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "Why didn't you call?" he asked Naomi, once the children had returned to their sandwiches. "I did." Her voice stayed level, but every word had weight to it. "I called the apartment. Disconnected. I called your office and got transferred to someone who told me you'd asked that all personal calls be screened. I emailed the address you used before your father's company had its trouble, and it bounced. I drove down from Ottawa with 2 letters and left them at your building's front desk. I sat in that lobby for 3 hours once, waiting to see if you'd come down." Adrian remembered that year the way you remember a fever, in flashes badly. His father stepping back from Sterling Group after the audit scandal that nearly sank it. His mother taking over his calendar because she'd said he needed to focus. A new phone, a new office, a different life built in a hurry with no forwarding address for the old one. "I did try to find you," he said. After about 2 years, when I couldn't stop thinking about it, I hired someone, a private investigator. He came back and told me you'd moved, that you seemed well, that you'd started a new life and it wasn't his place to interfere further. I believed him. I told myself that meant you'd chosen to be gone. Naomi's eyes flashed, and for a moment the calm cracked. Your investigator talked to your mother's assistant. I remember him. He never once knocked on my actual door. Adrian closed his eyes. His mother's fingerprints again, in a version of the story he hadn't even known to be suspicious of. What do they know? He asked, nodding toward the children. That they have a father, that we loved each other once. That grown-ups make mistakes, and maybe someday we'd know more. You didn't tell them I left. I would never put that on them. Her eyes were steady. I don't know that yet myself. He deserved that. He took it without arguing. I want to be part of their lives, he said. Naomi's shoulders went rigid. That's not a sentence you get to say once at a party and mean forever. I know. No, Adrian. You don't. Her voice stayed low, but every word landed like a stone dropped from a height. They're not a revelation you get to have. They're 3 kids who need breakfast made, and bedtime kept, and school forms signed, and dentist appointments remembered. They need someone who shows up when it's inconvenient. Someone who knows Isla acts brave when she's actually scared, and Cooper asks 100 questions when he's overwhelmed, and Nora hides her snacks because she still worries good things disappear. Nora, across the room, immediately clapped one small hand over the napkin she'd folded around a stolen strawberry. I didn't see anything, Adrian said. Nora narrowed her eyes at him. You looked. A terrible misunderstanding. Isla giggled. Cooper regarded him with something that might have been the beginning of approval. Naomi's face for just a moment softened despite itself. Then the door opened. Bianca stood in the hallway, Diane just behind her, and somewhere past them a photographer from a local business magazine was hovering, pretending not to be listening. Adrian, Bianca said, and she wasn't smiling anymore. The toast is 20 minutes late. What happened next happened quickly, and Adrian would spend a long time afterward being grateful it had, because it meant he didn't have time to be careful about it, and careful was exactly what had cost him 4 years. He told Bianca she deserved better than a fiancé who had just found out he had children he didn't know about, standing in her own engagement party, and Bianca, to her enormous credit, did not argue with him. She took the ring off in a small side room overlooking the water, set it on the windowsill, and said, I thought I could marry you, in a voice that made it clear the thinking had already stopped some time ago, without either of them noticing. I thought so too, Adrian said. That might be the saddest thing about us. If those children are yours, she said, become worthy of them slowly, learn their middle names, don't try to buy your way into being forgiven. He told her he would. He meant it more than he'd meant most things he'd said that summer. His mother did not take it as well. You will throw away everything we built for a woman who vanished, Diane said later in the kitchen with the caterers still clearing glasses in the next room. She didn't vanish, Adrian said. You made sure of that. Diane's chin lifted, the way it always did when she was choosing between 2 versions of the truth. I offered her support. You offered her silence with a price tag. I was protecting this family. You were protecting an image, Adrian said, and something in his own voice surprised him. Steady, in a way it hadn't been all night. I'm done confusing the two. The first real conversation happened 3 days later, on the phone, and it was not romantic. It was practical, and somehow that made it easier. Naomi told him about the daycare in Ottawa that had closed and forced her back to Toronto, about the resource centre in Parkdale where she now managed the books and the after-school programs, about Isla's dinosaur phase and Cooper's maps. He'd started drawing the TTC subway system from memory, extending it into imaginary lines that went places the real system never would, and about Nora's collection of smooth stones, one in every coat pocket, for luck. You own 4 companies, Naomi said, and you're writing this down on paper? Paper's harder to accidentally forward to my mother. There was a pause, and then Naomi laughed, small and brief but real, and something in Adrian's chest unclenched for the first time in days. That Saturday he met them at Trinity Bellwoods, arriving 20 minutes early in shoes he had genuinely deliberated over. Isla inspected them and said, good, with the finality of a customs officer. Cooper studied his face as though comparing it to a reference map. Nora carried a small purple backpack shaped like a beaver and would not cross the wooden bridge over the creek unless Naomi went first. The hour humbled him in ways 4 years of running a company never had. He learned that pushing a swing required rhythm, not force, that Cooper liked to be asked before being picked up, that Isla had no patience for adults who gasped when she climbed too high. You're internally gasping, Naomi told him, when Isla reached the top of the climbing dome. Is that visible? Extremely. By the end of the afternoon, his good sweater had grass stained into one elbow, his coffee had gone cold in his hand, and Cooper had informed him that his office was inadequate on account the kids dug in the sandbox. Adrian apologized without hiding behind the company, or the investigator, or his mother. "I let my life become unreachable," he said. "Even if I never got the letters, I built the walls that made it possible for someone to intercept them." Naomi watched him carefully. "That's the first apology you've given me that didn't have a but hiding in it somewhere. I'm trying to retire the word." Her mouth curved, just slightly, and it stayed with him for the rest of the week. He didn't transform overnight. He missed one scheduled video call because a shareholder meeting ran long, and when he finally called, Naomi's voice was calm but distant. "You said 4 o'clock, I know. They waited by the laptop." The sentence lodged somewhere under his ribs and stayed there. "It won't happen again," he said. "Don't promise adjust." So he did. He blocked family time on his calendar under a label that said "Una-Avable," and told his assistant that the label meant exactly that. No exceptions, no rescheduling around a better offer. He learned pickup times at the daycare. He learned that Cooper's questions came in layers, and the fourth why was usually the real one. He learned that Isla's bravado cracked exactly once a week, usually on Sunday nights, and that Nora warmed slowly and then loved with both hands, no half measures. One Thursday evening, he drove to the Parkdale Family Resource Center to return a stuffed beaver Nora had forgotten in his car. He expected to hand it off at the door and leave. Instead, he found Naomi in the middle of a budget crisis, a volunteer shortage, and 20 children painting cardboard replicas of Toronto's skyline while a ceiling leak dripped steadily into a bucket. "No, Marcus, glitter isn't a food group," Naomi was saying, moving through the chaos like weather. "Beautiful CN Tower, sweetheart. Let's keep the top on the tower." "Mrs. Ibori, I'll call the roofer again, but if I use my stern voice, they might stop picking up." "Adrian, why are you holding a stuffed beaver like it owes you money?" He looked down at the beaver. "It has a suspicious face." 3 children laughed. Naomi shook her head, but there was warmth underneath it. He stayed. Not because anyone asked him to. Because there were paper towels to fetch, tables to move, one boy's collapsing cardboard tower to prop back up. Adrian Sterling, whose signature could move an entire property portfolio, spent 40 minutes learning that packing tape held better if you pressed the corners first. "You missed a board call for this," Naomi said at the end of it, finding him crouched beside Cooper, who had wandered over and was explaining subway infrastructure to 2 older kids. "I sent regrets. For cardboard. For infrastructure." She laughed under her breath, and then the ceiling dripped into the bucket with a hollow plink, and they both looked up at the same time. "This place needs a new roof," Adrian said. "At minimum." Naomi's expression shut like a door. "No, I haven't offered anything yet. Your face offered 3 things and a grant committee. My face is generous. Your face is used to solving discomfort with a checkbook." She folded her arms. "If you actually want to help, the right way isn't swooping in. It's listening to what the families here actually need, respecting the staff who've kept this place running on duct tape for 6 years, and not turning it into a photo opportunity." Adrian looked around the room. The taped cardboard skyline, the tired volunteers, Naomi's handwritten schedule taped crookedly to the wall. "Then teach me," he said. She blinked. "You mean that? Yes, you're a hard man to stay angry at when you're holding a beaver and a cup of glitter." The story got out to Adrian or Naomi, but through a guest at the lake house who mentioned it to the wrong person at the wrong dinner. By noon the next day, there were 2 reporters outside Sterling Group's offices on Bay Street. By evening, there were more outside Naomi's building in Parkdale. She called him once. "There are people outside," she said, her voice tight but even. "No cameras yet, but they're not leaving. The kids think we're playing rainy day hide and seek. It's not raining. Therefore, details are flexible." He wanted to apologize. Instead, he remembered what she'd asked of him weeks earlier. Action first, guilt later. And within the hour, his legal team had issued privacy notices and his security director had quietly cleared the sidewalk. He didn't go over until Naomi told him he could. He found her in her small kitchen, making grilled cheese while the triplets built a blanket fort in the living room, and narrated a documentary they were only half watching. "Our job," Naomi said, sliding a sandwich onto a plate, "is to keep this family calm." Color touched her cheeks at the word "this." Adrian didn't reach for it, but he noticed. He washed his hands and cut the sandwiches into triangles, because Isla insisted triangles tasted faster than squares, and when Nora set a blue napkin down beside his plate, Naomi murmured, "That means she approves of you." "They like you," she admitted, after the kids had gone back to their blanket fort. "They're easy to love," he said, before caution could stop him. Then quieter, I don't mean to claim what I haven't earned yet. I just mean, every time I leave here, the world feels a little less correct. Naomi looked down at her hands. That's a dangerous thing to say to someone who spent years figuring out how to make the world work without you in it. I know. Do you? I'm learning the difference, he said, between wanting a place in something and earning one. The Sterling Foundation's annual gala had, before all of this, been intended as a glittering send-off to Adrian and Bianca's engagement. A fundraiser held every autumn in one of the old distillery buildings downtown. All exposed brick and string lights, donors in black tie moving between displays funded by money that rarely touched the neighborhoods it claimed to help. Bianca had quietly withdrawn from the event. His mother had suggested cancelling it, or at least scaling it down to a private dinner. Adrian refused. This foundation funds family and arts programming, he said. So this year, the families and the art are going to be the center of it, not the backdrop. He asked Naomi to consult on the community portion, not as a favor, and not as a symbol, but as a paid contractor, with a contract that guaranteed decision-making authority and, at her insistence, no requirement that she appear in a single photograph. This is annoyingly respectful of you, she told him, reading it over. I'm expanding my skill set. Don't get charming about paperwork, too late. For 3 weeks they worked side by side, redesigning the evening's flow so donors moved through the children's art before dinner instead of after. When they'd be too full and too tired to actually look, Naomi added quiet rooms for overstimulated kids, allergy-safe food, and transit stipends for parents who couldn't afford the drive downtown. Adrian watched his own executives underestimate her in every meeting and then, one by one, start taking notes. The gala arrived on a cold, clear October evening. The distillery's cobblestones lit gold, paper lanterns strung between the brick buildings, small sculptures and paintings displayed on museum-style placards with the children's names printed underneath. Isla wore a silver dress and appointed herself assistant director of guests. Cooper carried a hand-drawn map of the venue. Nora wore a blue ribbon and kept one lucky stone in her coat pocket. Naomi wore navy. Adrian saw her across the courtyard and, for one dangerous second, forgot that patience was supposed to be part of loving someone. Don't say anything dramatic, she warned when he reached her. I was going to ask if the signage arrived. Liar, a respectful liar. Her smile when it came warmed him all the way through. The evening began beautifully. Donors listening, parents relaxed for once, children explaining their own art with the seriousness of museum curators. Even his mother came, dressed in charcoal instead of her usual silver, keeping a careful distance from Naomi that Adrian understood for the first time as an attempt at restraint rather than disapproval. Then the keynote donor, an older man named Aldergate from one of the city's oldest banking families, went off script. He praised the foundation, praised Sterling Group, praised Adrian's leadership, and then turned toward the children's exhibit and remarked with a chuckle how heartwarming it was to see families from modest backgrounds lifted up by people who understood real leadership. The room stiffened. Some of these families simply need better examples, Aldergate went on, unaware. Isla, standing near the front beside her lopsided clay sculpture of a beaver, looked confused. A mother near the exhibit lowered her eyes. A mother near the exhibit lowered her eyes. Adrian felt the room begin to split cleanly along old lines. Giver and receiver, polished and the podium. Naomi caught his eye and gave one small shake of her head. Not you. Not this. Then she did something better. She walked to the podium herself, without asking permission, and smiled at the room as though every person in it belonged there equally. Thank you, Mr. Aldergate, she said. And thank you to every donor, teacher, volunteer, and child who built this evening. I work with families who don't need to be lifted up by anyone's idea of themselves. They need doors that open properly, rooms that don't leak, a safe way to get here, patient teachers, and the basic dignity of being listened to before anyone decides what's best for them. The room went silent. Her voice stayed warm. That was its power. Tonight you've seen paintings and sculptures and hand-drawn subway maps made by young artists with real ideas and real courage. If you're giving tonight, don't give because you imagine yourselves above the people you're giving to. Give because this city gets better when every kid has room to create, and every parent can walk into that room without being made to feel small. Applause started at the back among the parents, then the teachers, then slowly some of the donors, until the whole courtyard was filled with it. Isla clapped so hard her barrette slid sideways. Cooper looked up at Adrian. Mom used her good voice, he said. Adrian's throat was tight. She did. Naomi stepped down without triumph, returning to help Nora retie her ribbon. His mother found him a moment later. She's remarkable, Diane said quietly. She always was. I know. His mother's face looked older than it had at the lake house. less composed, and more honest for it. I knew enough. About her, about you, about what I was preventing. Why tell me this now? Diane's gaze moved toward the children. Isla was explaining beaver anatomy to a bemused city councillor. I mistook control for care, she said. I owe her an apology. Yes, she may not accept it. Also yes. A young board member, Aldergate's nephew, approached Adrian shortly after with a knowing look. Quite a speech from Miss Calder. Though perhaps not the ideal optics. People might say the foundation's become personal. It is personal, Adrian said, and walked away from him toward the podium. He hadn't planned to speak. He adjusted the microphone anyway. When this evening was planned, he said, I thought this foundation existed to demonstrate generosity. I was wrong. Generosity isn't a performance from a higher floor. It's a responsibility to stand beside people whose work already matters. The courtyard quieted further. Mrs. Calder reminded us of that tonight, not because she was invited here as a symbol, but because she's the reason this event has any integrity at all. She listened before she planned. She kept families from becoming decoration. She made this room honest. Naomi's eyes shone. Adrian glanced toward the children. I've learned recently that showing up late isn't the same as showing up well. I can't undo the years I missed, but I can say publicly what should never have been treated as private in the first place. I am proud of my children. I am grateful to their mother, and I intend to spend the rest of my life earning the trust they have every right not to give me easily. For one full breath, the courtyard was silent. Then Isla shouted, That's us! And the tension broke into laughter, and the applause that followed was messier and warmer than any Adrian had heard in that building before. Nothing about what came after was simple. There were still custody, forms, and lawyers and careful conversations about schedules. Adrian sat through school meetings and learned bedtime songs and learned which crackers Cooper considered structurally trustworthy. He stopped taking Naomi's caution personally, which turned out to be its own kind of work. By Thanksgiving, the triplets turned 5. Naomi planned a small party in the park with cupcakes and a scavenger hunt that Cooper designed and Isla immediately took over. Adrian arrived early with folding chairs and a box of Timbits, which Nora inspected with great seriousness before allowing onto the picnic table. Diane came too, by invitation, in a plain wool coat instead of anything with a designer label, standing awkwardly at the edge of the blanket until Isla marched up to her. Are you the fancy grandma? Diane glanced at Naomi, uncertain. I believe I was. Are you still? If you'll have me, I could try being Grandma Diane. Isla considered this with the gravity of a treaty negotiation. Do you know beaver facts? Not many. You'll need training. I accept the terms. Adrian watched his mother receive her first beaver lesson from a 5-year-old wearing a paper crown, and beside him, Naomi laughed softly, and for once the laughter didn't run away from either of them. Later, after the cupcakes and the scavenger hunt, which Nora won by quietly watching where everyone else searched wrong, Adrian found Naomi by the fence at the edge of the park, the sky going gold behind the downtown skyline. 5, she said. I still can't believe it. I wish I'd been there for the first 4. You'll probably say that every year. I probably will. Will it get annoying? A little. I'll try to vary the wording. She smiled. He stood beside her, close but not quite touching. Naomi, he said, I love you. She closed her eyes. Adrian, I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm not trying to rush anything or turn their birthday into a scene or pretend I've earned more than I have. I just need you to know that this isn't a memory I'm arguing with anymore. It's a choice I'm making. With my calendar, my name, my patience, and whatever future I have left. When she opened her eyes, they were wet, but she was smiling in that careful way that had once protected her, and now finally let him see past it. That's a very lawyer way of saying it. Too much? A little. I love you too, she said, but slowly is perfect. Their first kiss the second time around happened. Weeks later in Naomi's kitchen, after the kids were asleep and Adrian had fixed a loose cabinet handle under her close supervision. You're becoming useful, she said, inspecting the handle. High praise. Don't let it go to your head. He leaned in slowly enough that she could step back if she wanted to. She didn't. By the following autumn, Adrian's condo no longer looked like a magazine spread. The drawer that had once held linen napkins was full of crayons. A hand-drawn subway map extended well past the actual city limits covered one wall in removable tape. Nora's lucky stones sat in a small dish by the coffee machine. Naomi kept her own apartment. Trust, she told him, didn't require surrender, and he'd learned, finally, not to argue with that. Almost a year after the party at the lake house, Sterling Group hosted a smaller dinner at the same house on Rosso. Not an engagement, not a performance, but the opening of what was now called the Calder Family Resource Center, funded in part by the foundation and run entirely, by contract, by Naomi. She'd lost a vote she hadn't known Adrian had arranged over the name. She'd been annoyed about it for 3 days. She'd cried privately when she finally saw the sign. That evening she wore navy again. The triplets walked in ahead of her, 5.5 now, deeply pleased with their own matching outfits. Adrian waited near the entrance instead of the center of the room. He'd learned the difference. Isla ran to him first. "We came with Mum, I see that." Cooper held up a new drawing, the man in dark clothes, the woman in navy, 3 children, a silver-haired grandmother, and in the corner a small beaver for reasons nobody questioned. The label underneath the tall man no longer said Maybe Dad. It said Dad. Adrian looked at the word until it blurred. "Are you sad?" Nora asked, tugging his sleeve. He crouched down. "No, sweetheart. Very happy. Your happy face is wet. It does that sometimes." She nodded as though filing this under acceptable adult behavior, and went to find her stone. Naomi reached him last. "You okay?" He handed her the drawing without a word. She saw the single word underneath and pressed one hand flat against her chest. For a moment they stood together at the edge of the lake where, exactly a year before, everything had come apart in front of 100 strangers. The water still held the last of the light. The house behind them still looked like something out of a catalogue. But this time Adrian wasn't standing beside the wrong future. "Do you remember what you said that night you left?" he asked. "I said a lot of things. You said you didn't know what happened next." Her eyes softened. "I remember. I think I know now," he said, and nodded toward the children, weaving through the crowd, toward his mother laughing awkwardly as Isla tried to teach her to say A with proper conviction, toward the life that hadn't arrived as a clean victory but as a second chance that asked something of him every single day. "This," he said. Naomi slipped her hand into his. "This is a good beginning." Across the water, someone had started a small fire in the pit near the dock, and the sound of it crackling carried up the lawn, warm and ordinary, and Adrian didn't need the room to witness what he felt. He only bent toward her and said quietly, "Thank you for coming that night." She leaned against him just enough. "Thank you for finally opening the door."